the Reading Rainbow Emperor, and this is my review of Jake and the Dynamo, The Wattage of Justice, by D.G.D. Davidson and published by Superversive Press. Jake and the Dynamo is the best I've yet seen of America's relentless inspiration of, consummation of, and then imitation of Japanese culture. Indeed, one can imagine the colossus that is degeneracy striding from the Isles of Yamato to flash its disturbingly bulgy panties across the land, assuredly as revenge for World War II. Millions are dead or genetic dead ends or questioning their life choices after one too many drinks and a bad decision to flirt with that cute kawaii thing down at the bar. Mistakes are made, and we are all in hell. Jake and the Dynamo is hilarious, dark, awesome, an equal mix. I just can't get enough of it. Dance Davidson balances that sweet, sweet line between humor, lolly grimdark, and character drama to make for an enjoyable and gripping story. It has all the best parts of the light novel genres without any of the bad, namely isekai. This is the top tier of magical girl. Disagree, and you'll catch these white gloved hands of love and friendship. The plot is nice and simple. Urbanopolis is under siege by all the forces of evil, everywhere. Only magical girls stand in the way of total annihilation. There are no roving cities. There are no last redoubts. The final siege of man is now, and we are losing. Slowly, but surely. Of course, Jake, our main character, who is, as these things happen, forced to go into the 5th grade because of a computer glitch in their system. There he meets Dana Volt, who's a pretty dynamo, tops magical girl, but don't tell anyone, who hates him and accuses him of sexual harassment until the robot dinosaurs invade, from Andromeda, as these things go. Jake and the Dynamo doesn't quite hit the ever-present humor as well as I'd like. There's tons of jokes throughout. I'm very much against, though, the gray of the dry and custard pie ends of the humor scale. I prefer one or the other or both, but never the mix. There's custard pie, there's desert dry, and then there's in between things. I get that are funny, but DGD just put my heart through the ringer, and I'm still recovering from the horrific maiming of my chosen waifu material. Then he has the zombies dance to staying alive. Well, it's more than just maiming. Maybe don't naturally plan to waifu up any of these girls. Here's an excerpt of two that I personally found quite humorous. Let's see here. Alright, so Sukaban Tsubasa is the new magical girl. And she's giving a review to Barbara something or other about it. Meh, this bad boy is the laser blazer. With a series of clatters and clicks, the weapons folded back into Tsubasa's arms. She put her hands behind her head and stretched. Oh, and speaking of bad boys, Tsubasa added, now that the fat lady is singing on the fighting, I'ma get together with some trashy guys, capiche? I think maybe we do some really bad stuff. Might share a beer. Might smoke a cigarette behind the bushes. Might spray paint rude words on a wall. Barbara she's a reporter, put her hands to her mouth and staggered backwards. She almost dropped the mic. Immediately, the interview cut to an elderly lady. Around her neck was a string of pearls, which she fiercely clutched in arthritic fingers. Text appeared at the bottom of the screen. Juanita Cisne Cancion, former magical girl, Swan Song Juanita. Back in my day, Juanita said in a creaky voice, magical girls limited their questionable behavior to wanton violence, public nudity, and sapphism. But these modern magical girls are just out of control. That Sukuban Tsubasa is a menace. I love it. Then, let's see here. Is this one of the funny ones? Yes, it is. The zombie woman with the squirming brain stood on the other side of the counter like a customer buying a snack. She reached a hand, its flesh torn back from the bones of its fingers, towards Jake's face. "Perform chest compressions to the following rhythm," declared the AED. It began playing "Staying Alive" by the Bee Gees. Jake blinked. That seems kind of frivolous." The zombie stopped moving. A look of confusion, as if they were trying to dredge up an ancient memory, replaced the predatory and ravenous look on the female zombie's face. She drew back from Jake and grunted. Then she pointed at the floor. She pointed at the ceiling. Slowly, dragging her heavy feet, she pointed at each of the four walls. The other zombies, their pelvises gyrating, pointed at the various random objects in the store. Tesla lowered himself to Jake's shoulder and whispered, "Do you know what they're doing?" Jake blinked again. I think they're dancing." "Speculations. Humans," said Tesla, as he again adjusted his rebellious spectacles, "like to get down with their bad selves." As suddenly as it had started, the music stopped. "Perform rescue breaths," the music machine declared. "Breathe, breathe." The zombies stopped dancing. And of course it goes back to seriousness. So it's like it's got the humor, but then it gets serious, which is quite amusing. Let's see here. Nope, that's not a funny one. I do like Sukuban Sabasa. She's my favorite. If she's killed off, ooh, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I don't buy any more physical copies. Nope. Nope. I've got a few things I'll be reading out later. Do I do this yet? All right. So let's see here. How does destroying Orion's belt affect us, though? Tesla groaned and shoved his glasses farther up his clypeus. He's a bug, this guy. "You are extraordinarily slow. Think, young man. Use that stunted brain of yours, even though it pains you. If Esau had destroyed Orion's belt, then tell me, what would have happened to Orion's pants?" Jake blinked. Slowly he said, "You have got to be. Do you still not grasp their nefarious plan? The evil space aliens union intended nothing less than to moon your entire solar system. But that's... If it weren't for our heroic efforts, then, even now, as you gaze into the night sky, instead of beholding the wonders of the cosmos, you would instead be gaping at Orion's shapely yet extraordinarily hairy buttocks, gasping in horror, no doubt, or maybe prurient interest in your case, since you seem to be a little, well, you know. Hey! Let's see. Where is... Why did I mark this spot? It's a good thing this is my first one, otherwise this would be inexcusable. I do like the Tanuki. That Sukuban Tsubasa's familiar. Wait, I'll still need this. He's very funny. The humor was pretty good, but what kept me going was the story and characters. Just everything else. The characters are top tier. The drama, top tier. Descriptions are on the top tier, baby. The fight scenes go from good to pretty great pretty smoothly. There isn't a dull moment outside the beginning, but I'll talk about that later. The foreshadowing in the books is something else. It's absolutely crazy. From the beginning stuff about the various characters and their interactions, to backstories about the Moon Princess and the villains, to Sukuban Tsubasa, to just about everything in there. Nothing really seems arbitrary, or without purpose, or without some depth or drama to them. It's all spot on, pitch perfect. Diggity Diggity Davidson juggles probably one of the widest and most distinctive casts I've seen in a novel of this generation in a very long time. There are no Soldier 1s or Soldier 2s or old soldiers or 2 weeks from retirement soldiers running around here. All the characters have, with like one note to them. Not that they're bad characters, it's just hmm, all characters have some use or reveal something about another character. There are characters aplenty, and each unique snowflake has hidden deals that unfold like an origami flower, which each new look at them. Or when we watch them die. That also happens. Grease Pencil Marionette tops the chart for me. Detailed, complex, and evolving in character from her own backstory to her current state, there isn't any lack of depth with her. Uh, Even though she herself believes she has no depth as a character. Doug Davidson really puts in the work needed to create a living, breathing, unique group. I'm going to read another part. Even flat characters who show up for only one scene have stuff to them. It's just great. Nope. Nope. I should have removed these as I was going along. Do-do-do-do. Here we go. So this is Grease Pencil Marionette has just been rejected by Jake for reasons. Um, let's see here. Over a century ago, in spite of Takumi's stern warnings, Marionette had hacked herself. After jacking into Sentinel, she had used the supercomputer's powerful processors to search through her labyrinth of complex software until she found her sexuality algorithms, excuse me. Then she shut them down. She knew she was weakening herself in the process, as her magic power came from unfulfilled desires. But some desires were just too painful. She had spent a fortnight mooning over a boy. She had written him sonnets. She had painted his portrait. She had lain on her bed for long hours contemplating the memory of his face. Once she had even slept on the cold ground outside his window. She was, after all, an emulation of an artist, so she loved like one. Then came the day when she artlessly confessed everything to him. She felt her synthetic heart sink as she watched the expression on his handsome, youthful face transform from bewilderment to amusement to disgust. I don't date toasters. That was all he said. He turned and walked away, and the sight of his broad shoulders growing smaller with the distance was the second to last sight she ever had of him. The last sight was of him laughing with another girl, who fawned over him, and leaned against his strong chest, her bleached hair shrouding half of her heavily painted face. Then the universe Marionette thought she understood shattered like glass, and its many pieces came back together in a shape she didn't recognize. That very night she broke into her own software. After all, she told herself, this was her duty, even if it was subtracted from her power. The human race was dying, year by year, in spite of welfare incentives, in spite of the bachelor tax and the small family tax, in spite of several reductions of the legal marriage age, the citizens of Urbanopolis could never quite manage to keep the population growth consistent above replacement rates. The monsters were killing them off, albeit slowly. So the man she loved was right. In a world like this, nobody could afford to date a toaster. It was bad enough that the city had to make a fighting force out of young females who hadn't had the chance to bear children. Keeping all this in mind, in order to quiet her conscience, simulation software, she found the program that tormented her and killed it dead. But now, after all this time, it was back, and it wanted revenge. She sat on the floor, forehead against her knees, and sobbed. For the second time, a boy had walked out on her. And it goes on for a bit with some interesting drama. The story really keeps it going through the ups and downs. It starts a little slowly, from the weird knock gag of Jake being stuck in the fifth grade to various weird bits with Dana Volt, the family, Jake's best friend. The early bit takes half a minute longer than it should. I don't mean the introduction with the first magical girl fight against Abraxas. The conflicts never seem to end, and always surprise me even two-thirds of the way through the book. And I mean character conflict and action conflicts equally. Each one seems to be uniquely crafted, and uniquely dangerous, and new elements are thrown in every so often to keep things fresh. Boredom simply does not exist in this book, and even the blank space between fights has purpose. My suspension of disbelief was hard to get, but easy to keep. When the story finally got going, it hit its stride so hard brick walls would have disintegrated before its superluminary speed. Really, at no point did something happen where I went, "Oh, hell no," and put down the book. I'm going to do that better. "Oh, hell no," and put down the book. No logic was violated once a rule was set. This can be seen with the casual disregard for magical girl hard limits, but a great regard respecting mortality. No one almost dies then comes back. People die. People die permanently. It's not a good situation to be in. No one is introduced only to be killed later, and though people are introduced and die, but there's a certain flavor of it. When you're taken on a ride, like when they introduce like a kid character and kill them off to show the villain means business. Rather, the villain means business shows up, a character fights him, wins the fight, but the villain gets a cheap shot in it at the end. Even though, but it's like the setup for it doesn't create tons of sympathy. We already have natural sympathy for Magical Girls. We have some of her character, and we understand like what her gimmick is, which isn't the same as like a little kid being killed by villain du jour, um, who of course is just the purest, most innocent child in the magical land somehow. Um, so by the time she dies, we are familiar with her, we're close to her, but it feels earned because of all the work that was done beforehand, which is incredibly important to do if you're going to do a sort of like kill a character off like that. Though personally, Andalusia was too good for this world anyway. No one disappears to reappear at the last second without a clear reason to be there. Even demons and zombies come from somewhere, and that they are handled just right. I'm quite burned out on zombies. I don't care. I didn't even watch World War Z because it was a complete travesty compared to the book. Um, but DGD Davidson still diggity still pulled it off pretty well. Each element of the story was properly mixed in with each other. While I wouldn't call this story grim-dark, dun dun dun, it is certainly dark. From the scenes in the shelter to the demon's demands on the soul of the magical girls infighting, Mr. Davidson, I presume, handles every element with care and precision. Never once does a story depart from the world it has built, and every trope, stereotype, and hackneyed phrase stays real. Many stories would start bright and end dark, but it is always better to say that the story is dark and reveal its depth as time goes on and the light that is within it. Despite this, the story is superversive, having made obeisance to hope, religion, heroism, and deliverance. The magical girls' self-sacrifice and drive to defend everything they hold dear because of the threat that exists to the city, as well as to whatever tragedy or spirit that infests them. Even if some of the characters seem deceived or misinformed by other powers, at no point does anyone choose to be evil. Certainly, Sukuban Tsubasa's want to steal cigarettes and illicit movie theater seats uh, makes her humorous, but her villainy is cartoonish and played for laughs. It is not as serious as any of the monsters or Dark Queen or the Shadow and all that jazz are treated. However, the story does toe the line close to subversive. While the magical girl genre is subverted to hell and superverted to heaven, Puella Magica, I'm looking at you, there is a strong sense of hell on earth, and the struggle is more Nightlands or grim detective fiction than something fully on the superversive side of things. Characters act immorally, and while much of it is presented as immoral, some of it isn't, and is encouraged to be immoral from our own perspective. Despite the many people seeking to defend their reality, few are trying to improve it. Few do more than live in it. Many die in it. And while there are many heroic scenes in the defense of Old Urbanopolis, uh, is desperate, dirty, and the shining good example is killed, is desperate and dirty. Even the shining good example is killed by a craven villain. I'm not going to argue for the purity or to the I'm not going to argue that the story would be degraded if it was more pure. It wouldn't be. It would have hurt the tale more than anything else. It is exactly what it needed to be. The story does not for 1 second pull back from what it needs to be. One might imagine that writing such a story is like riding a tiger. While the tiger may sleep sometime, the second that you stop riding the tiger, it devours you. In consideration, while the book has many quite adult themes in it, it is a superversive book at the end. Characters are unhealthy, but they don't seek to be unhealthy. They are thrust into the life they have and do their best with it. As they say in the book, to be a magical girl is to suffer. Because a book begins with suffering, from the very first fight, nothing is subverted by this. Because the fight against the evil is long, arduous, and painful. To reveal the less than white armor of the knights fighting the war, while upholding their heroism, is not quite superversive, but it is certainly not subversive. The only real sticking problem I have with the story is the beginning. I don't mean the first chapter, the fight scene, and the very funny Dark Queen stuff. That's the hook. It's the conceit that puts Jake in the fifth grade. I don't really understand the humor, if it was humor or why it was allowed to happen. Uh, Essentially, the humor didn't prevent the logic from taking hold and showing the weird topsy turvy thing of the world. I think that's mostly my problem with it. I understand sarcasm. I understand the Three Stooges taking jobs as plumbers and then mucking everything up is funny. I don't really get the fifth grade thing or why it's permanent. It felt very arbitrary in all the worst ways. It had to happen. It had to be acted on as if it was permanent. But this, combined with a slow build up to Pretty Dynamo, makes it a bit of a slog. I don't really care about his best friend. I don't really care about all his best friend's sisters. I know it's world building, but there's a bit where there's no humor, and the change to humor is a bit much to me, or it's not enough. It banks on what the first chapter provided, but didn't grip me like it should have. I'm not a big like first chapter and then I'm just sold kind of guy. It banks fight scenes with the drama between characters we don't know are a dime a dozen. While the threat can be toned down, the humor can't always be. Now, I don't want to seriously criticize anything and not offer an idea that would have corrected it. I'd backtrack and go, it's only temporary until we find your files. The original were eaten by the purple people and paperwork eater last Tuesday. We'll give you the work you would have done as if you were in your proper class, but you have to show up for the attendance sake, blah, blah, blah. It's serious bureaucracy that reveals the humor. I swear these dogs. It reveals the humor, but also the reasonableness from the adult characters, rather than their unreasonable attitude that's in the story. Pretty Dynamo, Sword Seamstress, and Grease Pencil Marionette can be unreasonable, not so much the NPCs who only show up for one scene. Otherwise, you get a thing where, like, it's ridiculous, it's normal, it's ridiculous again. But really, it should be, it's normal, ridiculous, ridiculous. If you get me, like the baseline where, like, he goes to his family and he interacts with the best friend. I'm not really complaining about the normalcy of that. However, once you get up to the next level, it should be more ridiculous. Then the next level above that is the magical girl level and the villains and all that jazz, and that should be ridiculous to keep up the humor. At least that's what I'm getting from it. Uh, it should be a mix of the wacky. I assure you, Jake, the purple people and paperwork eater is no laughing matter. It killed 3 people and ate my ledger last week. I missed that ledger. And then have her break down in tears as Jake backs away slowly. It would promote the humor inherent within the situation, that is otherwise portrayed as very too almost realistic. I'd back away from realism, do shock treatment. Yes, Jake, it is serious. Blah, 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 blah. And then we can have something that we don't care about, but it's funny based on her reaction. I covered this. Also, I don't quite understand the ragamuffin thing, short story at the end, even though it was very cool. I assume it's part of another time or another place, but it's a little bit too out of left field for me to have like a good picture of what it is. It's got hints of Indian stuff, but then it has people who have like super technology. So is it like from the future? Is it like from the past, or is it like another world? It's not quite there because all the characters are human, or human with genetic modifications and technology. Um, Ragamuffin is a magical girl and that connects it, but there's nothing else really there for me. It's a bit out of place. Don't recognize the culture. Don't recognize the technology. I covered this. Jake and the Dynamo is a pretty great story. It has humor, adventure, great fight scenes. The cover is excellent. Unfortunately, I fear that its unique stylings, Magical Girl, there we go. Yeah, you see it now. Magical Girl focus and Asian sensation flavor may bar people from its full glory. For me, I found it refreshing, balanced, and better than all the tippy-toppest tier of light novel. I recommend Jake and the Dynamo to everyone with this sort of interest. This is the Reading Rainbow Emperor, wishing you happy reading.